in the interest of Jamaica. Guide us, dear Father, and hasten the footsteps of those to come. And when we have completed the task here, let it be said by Jamaicans, it's well done. In Jesus' name, amen.
I'll invite the substantive chairman to.
Thank you, Member Dunn. Thank you, Member Phillips. Uh, Members, before we go into today's agenda, just a few housekeeping matters. Minister, the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, yesterday tabled the second supplementary estimates. He has indicated that he would like to take them on Tuesday of next week. I think that's the 28th. Am I correct? Yes. The chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has indicated that the committee will be willing to exchange dates so that they would meet on the Wednesday and allow their public appropriations, the public PAAC, to meet on the Tuesday. So it's the intention, if the committee agrees, to meet next week Tuesday at 10 o'clock with the Ministry of Finance and Public Service to review the second supplementary estimates. We are going to meet, do the deliberations as quickly as possible, and generate the report for Parliament later in the day. I've indicated to the Minister and the Leader of Government Business that in the past it was impractical to attempt to get the report for Finance Committee, which would normally be held at 1 o'clock, so that Parliament would start at 2, given the fact that the report has to be written, printed, etc., signed by members. So what I've indicated that we would probably have the report ready by about 3 o'clock, at which stage they would suspend Parliament and take our report and do the standing finance and continue Parliament. So if members agree to that, I'll ask the Secretary to the committee to make the necessary arrangements. I think all members got a copy of the supplementary yesterday. Any comments? All right. Okay. Thanks. Thank you, members. Any apologies? No?
Yes, from
Mr. Campbell and Mrs. Holness. All right. Could I ask members, the minutes of the meetings held on January the 15th were circulated. I'm going to take them as having been read. Are there any corrections to the minutes? If there are no corrections, I would ask for somebody to move for confirmation.
So moved.
Yes, Member Stewart and Phillips. Okay, so no matters arising from the minutes, so we move on to new business. Today, we'll take the Ministry of National Security. Members, we were notified yesterday that the permanent secretary would not be available because they are involved in security and other arrangements with the Secretary of State. I am simply informing the committee. So I suspect that may go for a wider range of persons. So given all of that, what we will do is take what we can today. We'll move through as quickly as possible, recognizing that given all that's going on there, we try not to detain them too much. And then we'll do the supplementary next week. If there is Parliament the following week, we would finish with the Ministry of National Security. So with those comments, I would invite the representatives here. All right, good morning. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen. Yes, welcome to the Public Administrations and Appropriations Committee. We have representatives from the Ministry of National Security, the Constabulary Force, different departments, as well as from INDECOM. Welcome, Commissioner. So, members, today we'll turn it over. We have gotten a report from the Ministry. We did not require one from INDECOM. I think the notice was also quite short. But in the past we have had both come. What I would suggest we do is we'll be leading the team from the Ministry of National Security.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and to the members. My name is Delroy Simpson, acting as Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of National Security. And today, I'm sitting in for P.S. McIntosh, who is unavoidably absent.
Yes, I hear she's guarding the Secretary of State.
Right. So I am supported today by members of the National Security Architecture. Starting to my immediate right, we have Colonel Desmond Edwards, who is the Director General of MOCA. And to my immediate left is DCP Fitzbailey of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. And next to him, we have ACP Warren Clark, also of the JCF. I will ask the other members of the team, starting to, that's immediately behind Desmond, to introduce themselves and just say where.
Morning, Nigel Park, MOCA.
Good morning, Devon Cohoon, JCF Finance.
Good morning, Claudette Martin, JCF Finance.
Good morning, Luke McIntosh, Ministry of National Security Finance.
Morning, Paul Bailey, Ministry of National Security.
Good morning, Nicola Wittig, Ministry of National Security, Finance Unit.
All right, Mr. Chairman, P.S. McIntosh, as usual, in keeping with the approach that she normally takes. She has an opening statement that she would have me deliver on her behalf. So I'm seeking approval from you to proceed with that.
All right. 1 second. Yes, we will have you lead off in a second. From INDECOM, Commissioner, how are you, sir? Yes.
Quite fine.
Excellent.
I wish you a happy new year.
Yes. What I would ask, if you could introduce your team. We know you don't have a report, and then we'll go through with the constabulary force, and then we can determine from there.
Mr. Chairman, with me to my left, Mr. George McIntosh, Director of Finance. Then Mr. Hamish Campbell, Assistant Commissioner. Behind Hamish is Mrs. Marsha Suman Gray, Senior Director of Corporate Services. And behind me, Ms. Danielle Anderson, Senior Public Relations Officer.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Simpson, I'll turn it over. If you can give us your brief on the ministry, and then I'll turn it over to the members for their deliberation.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we wish to assure this committee and the public that the Ministry of National Security remains committed to the attainment of a safe and secure Jamaica, achieved through 1. Evidence-based policy and legislative development. 2. Strategic resource and capacity mobilization. And 3. Collaborative program execution support to improve internal and border security. The Ministry is very much aware that our crime reduction efforts require a modern approach characterized by the use of advanced technologies to serve as an effective enabler for our operational entities, and by that I mean the JCF, MOCA, JDF, etc. We wish to report that during the current year, significant strides were made with the implementation of several initiatives meant to bolster the capabilities of law enforcement. These include 1. The build-out of the National CCTV Surveillance Program, popularly referred to as Jamaica Eye. Outdated cameras were replaced, and we have entered into a contractual agreement for additional storage capacity to give us the capability to perform video analytics and license plate recognition. 2. Significant improvements to the traffic ticketing management system, which included completion of a major data cleanup, as well as the development, and I mean software development work on the e-warrant module. We are in consultations with Ministry of Justice as we speak to roll out this module, which will make the process of issuing warrants for unpaid tickets much more efficient. Software development to facilitate the issuing of traffic tickets using handheld devices are also far advanced. This is seen as part of the Ministry's public order efforts. Using handheld devices will reduce, if not eliminate, input errors and so forth, which has plagued the system over the years. Thirdly, we are at a contractual stage of acquiring a fleet management and tracking system to allow for better management of the over 1,500 JCF operational vehicles. As we speak, Mr. Chairman, some 100 devices are being installed on operational vehicles. 4.
Somewhat? Repeat that?
Some 100 tracking devices are being installed on JCF operational vehicles. 4. Mobility continues to be a priority of the ministry. So far, Mr. Chairman, for this year, we have acquired and deployed 175 vehicles. This includes 80 motorcycles and 95 other vehicles. We expect another 52 units to be delivered before the end of this financial year, with another 64 to be delivered early in the new financial year. We have prioritized over 60 police facilities across the country for significant renovation. To date, 22 have been completed, 21 are in progress, and another 20 are to commence before the end of the financial year. The phased implementation of the big data system, which will allow for an integrated database by the end of March 2020, which will significantly boost the investigative and intelligence capacity of law enforcement, is also being pursued. The servers, as we speak, are being put in place. At the same time, Mr. Chairman, significant progress has been made to improve the ability of law enforcement to communicate better. Can't have effective law enforcement without a robust communications network. We have received concept approvals from the Public Investment Management Committee on the following 5 projects. 1, an expansion of the P25 network to allow for 95% coverage of the island. So this will allow police radios to work virtually all across the country. 2, microwave expansion, and this is the provision of data or internet connections to over 90 JCF facilities. Upgrade of the computer-aided dispatch system. Also, the JCF LTE rollout, and this allows for wireless internet connectivity that is needed to enable the use of tablets and other devices in operational vehicles. The acquisition of P25 radio devices, and this is basically expanding the number of radios available to the JCF to work on the expanded P25 network. And Mr. Chairman, the Public Investment Management Committee approval has been received in respect of the automated fingerprint information system, upgrading of that system. And this is to improve the investigative capacity of law enforcement. On the legislative side, Mr. Chairman, a lot of effort was placed in advancing the legislative agenda in the current year. I must thank our partners at the Attorney General's Chambers and the Chief Parliamentary Council, as well as other stakeholders who worked with us to push through some crucial pieces of legislation which were brought to the House. I note the passage of the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2019 and the attendant regulations, which were passed in both houses without amendments. As you are aware, the passage of these crucial laws will not only aid in our investigative efforts around money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, but also places our financial sector in good standing. We all know that legislation takes time, but a lot of progress, Mr. Chairman, has been made with the amendments to the Firearms Act as well as the Anti-Gang Act, both of which should reach houses in short order and will go a far way in assisting our security forces in terms of reducing crime. Mr. Chairman, those are my remarks on behalf of P.S. McIntosh, and we are now available to take your questions.
Member Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Simpson, when I listen to your presentation, one thing that comes out frequently, significant progress. Progress, like prosperity, has measurable dimensions to it. Otherwise, it's just words floating in the air. For national security, there are definitive measurements. And all that is being done, or considered to be done, must be towards that definitive end measurement, which is crime reduction. Reduction in murders, reduction in shootings, reduction in burglary, reduction in robberies, etc. Those are the definitive quantitative measurement. So when I hear you speak of successes, all of these murders are up over last year. Shootings are up over last year. Break-ins are up over last year. Robberies are up over last year. So all the quantitative measurements, no progress has been achieved going forward. And therefore, it caused me to ask the significant progress that you mentioned of. You're saying that with all the efforts that the ministry has been making, the government has been making, you have failed to cause quantitative reduction in these. And those are the numbers I'm giving, are not my numbers. They are the JCF numbers. So I wanted to comment on that. And secondly, I wanted to comment about the efforts in the legislation. Again, you said significant progress. And you name a couple: anti-crime, anti-money laundering, amendment. One of the critical pieces of legislation that has been out front for a number of years is the MOCA legislation that has been passed almost 2 years now. A legislation is toothless, functionless, of no consequential value without the corresponding regulations for the legislation to work. For 2 years, with the significant progress you mentioned of, the MOCA legislation is yet to be in effect because the regulations are still not in place. Secondly, on the legislation, I would love to know, give us a status report on the different pieces of legislation which are being pursued now. Because a couple of years ago, in the throne speech, contributed to by the Ministry of National Security, we were told about a raft of legislation to fight crime, right, that would be promulgated. And your answer to those which have been promulgated will speak to that. But more significantly, legislation which is deemed critical by the security forces, the Prime Minister, the Minister of National Security, tells us that the reason why you have the need and the appetite for the SOE is because you need carte blanche, authority and power to detain persons and to do many other things that you can't do under other existing security legislation. That they will promulgate legislation as of December 27, 2018, when the opposition did not vote for the state of emergency renewal then, and the government said that there would be some legislation to strengthen the security forces' capability to deal with some of the challenges that they face. I would like to know, what are those bits of new legislative changes, either in new legislation, either in amendments, that is being developed since then to achieve that end? Because the next question I want to come to, and we have my namesake, DCP is here, who is representing the commissioner, who tells the country that the only way to fight crime and to reduce murders and shooting is for the suspension of rights and freedoms across the declared areas of SOE, that they cannot deal with criminals unless the rights are suspended, hence the need for the SOE. So I will want your comments on that before I proceed further on those.
Thank you, Member Jackson. Your comments are, carefully noted and understood in terms of the perspective from which you are taking this. All right, but from the perspective of the ministry, we recognized first up that we have a major challenge of public order and safety and security in the country. That is accepted by all stakeholders. Now, in order to meaningfully deal with the issue, I'm sure you would agree that there is a need to invest heavily in upgrading the machinery so that we have an effective response mechanism. So the success that I was telling you about, even though we have not yet seen the level of success that we would have preferred to see in terms of actual reduction in crime, we have to assess what we're doing from the input level as well to say that the machinery needs to be modernized so that we can respond better to the situation that is there. So
Simpson, along the answer in that line, that is not a new discovery. Are you just starting that investment now? 4 years back, that problem had existed? The deficiencies that you just made mention of?
No, it's not that the ministry is just starting to do that. If you look back at the investments over the years, I think we can say that there has been a steady increase in the capital budget. These are high intensive capital expenditures for which the necessary budgetary provisions have to be made.
Most of that was for the aircraft and the helicopters.
Yes, I concede that, but that is also part of the investment in the infrastructure. In fact, if I could share with you,
yes,
I had the benefit of visiting narcotics recently with the Commissioner of Police, and what I saw there was an increase in seizures. I can't tell you how much the increase has been, but when I inquired as to what was driving this, I was told that it has to do with the surveillance aircraft that had been acquired for the JCF. So I'm just giving you an example.
Yes, but Mr. Simpson, before you had the aircraft, Jamaica relied on our international partners to provide that support in the border surveillance and intelligence provision. You have ceased to rely on those sources, either because they refuse to cooperate with you or for whatever other reasons that force you to make that investment. I don't know if it's because they don't trust us, why they do it. I don't know. I'm speculating because that's where we relied on for that kind of technical support. It no longer remain, and you have chosen to have to invest in it because of its removal. So I don't want you to tell me about the seizures because of that investment. You could have had those successes if the cooperation had continued and you invest in the kinds of things that you are now speaking to this morning that exist to over 4 years ago or longer. So just bear that in mind. I don't want you to tell me about the drug seizure as the reason, the success why it was justified. That's why I asked you how long ago you knew the mobility. For example, when you bought those used cars and the over $427 million that was set aside, recognizing 4 or 5 years ago that mobility was a critical deficiency in the JCF. You apportioned $427 million out of one budgetary allocation. And how many vehicles that you got out of it?
Well, actually, member, $213 million. You're talking about the O'Brien's contract, right? We had paid over $213 million to O'Brien's Car Sales International. As you are aware, that contract got into some difficulties. That has been the subject of several discussions in this House. All right? But I wish to advise you that under the settlement agreement, we were to receive a total of 105 vehicles for that $213 million. And I am pleased to advise you and this honorable committee that we have received a total of 54 vehicles, more than 50% of those vehicles to date. And we are in the process of getting the remaining vehicles.
How many? 3 years after?
That is not lost on us, sir.
January 2017, you entered that contract. This is 2020. 3 years later. And you are pleased that you have 50% of what you sought to purchase.
We are not pleased that we have only 50%, but we are making steady progress, rather, in addressing the issue and getting the remaining vehicles. And we are confident that we will succeed.
Well, one success is that you have abandoned the used car policy. Would you accept that that was a colossal mistake?
I won't be able to speak on that, sir.
But you're not doing it anymore. If it was a success, why not continue it?
I will not respond to that, sir.
You'll not?
Because I am not the person, I'm not the entity that sets
make that
policy.
decision. But in your own informed and educated judgment, what would you say?
I think it would be inappropriate to make a statement about my personal view on the issue in this house.
We'll talk off the air about that one since you can't say it here. But no, in all seriousness, Mr. Simpson, all of us as members of parliament here represent constituencies with police stations where our people, our constituents, residents complain about the inability of the police to respond. Either don't have any vehicle or don't have enough. As a practice, we don't discuss in here, in open, the quantitative deficiency in each area for security reasons. We'll talk off here. But it is a fact that all across there is that deficiency. And anyone who tried to represent it to be otherwise would not be honest. In fact, they would be hypocritical. And if a professional would say that, it would be a dereliction of their professional conduct. Now, bear with me a little bit, Mr. Chairman, because the motor vehicle that you speak of is so critical. The motor vehicle is critical because it multiplies the presence of the security personnel in the communities. And not only it multiplies the presence, but it gives the capacity and the capability to the police force to respond on a timely basis when they are called by any citizen of Jamaica, an intruder outside the door, an accident, whatever it is. The police presence at the moment of distress is one of the most welcoming thing by any Jamaicans. Even the one them that cuss the police, they're going to call the police when they are in difficulties. So the ability of the police to be present when a Jamaican, a citizen or resident feel distress is so critical. And that's one of the reasons why I'm belaboring the point about the vehicle, the adequacy of the vehicle. And not only the adequacy of the vehicle, but the functionality of the vehicle. Because some couple months ago I was in one police division. I won't call it the name, but I'll say it off here to you. They were less than 50% of their vehicle allocation was functional. Now when you look on paper, they will have enough or significant number that they need, but half of them not working. Half of them is in the shop more than they're out working. So the purpose and the goal is not served. Now, the difficulty I have with that, Mr. Simpson, is that mechanical problems are things that you can solve. They are doable. It's not like trying to find a criminal out there in the open space. You have the motor vehicle to fix it. And then when you tell me about the millions you spend in capital for the aeroplanes and so forth, when you could have gotten overseas assistance to help you with that, right? And the criminals on the ground, you can't have a motor vehicle to apprehend them. I have a difficulty with that. So why is it that we are not doing much better? Is it because of resource allocation?
All right, so thank you again for that question. I should advise you that the ministry has taken the whole issue of mobility and is taking it seriously. All right, and to that end, we have seen an allocation of $1.3 billion in the current year's budget for vehicles.
Okay.
If I may finish,
no,
sir.
hold on. Let him.
If I may finish.
Sure.
We have launched a national competitive tender process for vehicles this year, and those vehicles will feature retrofitted features because we want to address the functionality issue. All right? An assessment was done of JCF mobility, and we saw where at least over 1,000 units were needed. We wouldn't be able to procure all those units in one financial year. We intend to do so across several, maybe 2, 3 financial years. And that is as much as I can say on that right now.
Before you go on, Member Jackson, just seeing as we're here at this point in the discussion, could we get the idea of how many vehicles we have at JCF now and how many are functional?
All right, I will ask ACP Warren Clark to speak to that.
Thank you, Chairman, members.
Microphone.
Thank you, Chairman, members. I hope you'll allow me to say that we have over 2,000 vehicles.
That's what we have now.
Yes.
And how many of those are functional? I mean, I know it's a moving target, but if you want to even try it by percentage, because it does seem like quite a few. Practically, when we're out there, we seem to have a lot of them.
So, in terms of functionality, I would say plus or minus 2,000 vehicles are functional. He
says that the 2,000 vehicles are functional.
Well, the answer to the first question is how many vehicles in all do we have?
Yes, 2,000.
And I said over 2,000.
Over, okay.
And in terms of functionality, I'm saying plus or minus 2,000.
No, I'm not.
All right. Don't. Yeah. No. Okay.
So,
the reason I'm asking is that perennially this is a problem for us. I know that there's a process now, but do you keep a track of how many vehicles you have in operation each year and sort of have an average year going along, you know what you have?
We do. One of the efforts now is to achieve 100% of the fleet being under 5 years. It's an active target that we are pursuing, and at the moment, for the first time, we're achieving 25% of the number of vehicles that we have as being under 5 years, and would like to progressively improve that.
When you say vehicles, you speak of all, are you talking about motorcycles, pickups, cars?
Yes, all
so
vehicles.
All. Yeah, Member Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little bit lost with those numbers. I'm asking the numbers in a global sense because I don't want to compromise security of any one area, which will be determined by the deployment. So I'm not going into the deployment, all right? Whether all of them is one or half of them here. I'm not going there for that reason. But losing the global numbers, you said that the amount of vehicles you have now is 2,000 plus? The plus is
over 2,000.
Near 3,000?
Closer to 3,000, yes.
So it's just under 3,000 then?
Closer to 3,000.
You see, the difference between 2,000 and 3,000 is a big jump. So it's kind of very vague, ACP.
So I'm trying to help you. So I said closer to 3,000, which would suggest
So it's
that
just
it is
under 3,000.
somewhere there.
Somewhere there. Of that, just under 3,000, come back to the chairman's question. What percentage of those are operational? Is it 80%, 75%, 90%, 50%? Where are we in terms of the functionality of that just under 3,000?
We would say that about 75%, maybe 70% of those vehicles are functional.
Okay. Those that remaining 25% that is non-functional, those are vehicles that can be made functional within a short period of time?
No. Those vehicles are submitted for board of surveys.
Oh.
We want to take them out. They have been inefficient, and that's why they are there. They're in the process of getting rid of them.
They're just on your records, but they are not
Yes.
vehicles that are in use or can be made to be in use.
Yes.
Now, is it then safe to say that you would need 4,000 vehicles altogether to make you adequately equipped? I'm just adding the 1,000 that you said more you need, plus what you have, which is 3,000. And we can make allowance for the 25% that has to be board of survey.
I didn't take those figures with me. I know that we are making progress where mobility is concerned.
Mr. SCP, I don't like the significant progress and the making progress, because at this committee that deals with appropriation, we deal with quantitative measurements. So you lose me when you say significant. You have to give it some qualification. 80% down, that down, so we have a sense of where we are.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. The thinking is that we'd need approximately 3,000 vehicles to be where we need to be. All right, and yes.
All right, let me just so that we can put this in context, just to qualify for our guests. The issue is this, that at the PAAC, we deal with administration and appropriation. So one of the things we're doing is really trying to help, because we know we have a problem. There's a real problem with national security, and part of that problem is the efficiency of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Crime is one of, if not the most important problem we have now, and an important part of fighting crime is the mobility. So when you hear us having a discussion, we're caught between two angles. We don't want to sort of really find out all the logistics of your organization, because that we don't want that as public. But at the same time, it's important for us to know what is happening. And quite frankly, on 2 occasions in the last year, I've bemoaned the fact that, well, over the last 3 years, I've had a problem, and I can only speak to what I know personally, in Westmoreland, where crime going out of control, having every problem. Eventually, you get a state of emergency, and I'm hearing that the state of emergency is so necessary. But at the same time, when I go up there and ask about police vehicles, there's a real problem. So if we're not dealing with this matter of mobility of the police force, then no matter how much you suspend, and go, legal rights and go into that element of it, you still can't move around. So we're trying to help in just trying to find out where we are, what is the situation, so that we can make our recommendations to Parliament. Because, as I said, you can't fight crime, if you can't get around. And we have situations where in some of our remote police stations, they talk about calling the police, and when you call the police, you know, if the one car is out somewhere, well, you have to wait till somebody come back and hope that you survive that period. So it's really not a indictment. We're trying to work with you to see how, because quite frankly, I'm happy that some cars are coming now, but the problem with police cars, again, is that if you, as you're getting them, there's an attrition taking place as well, especially with older cars. So the number of cars you have is a moving target. Car crashed yesterday, tomorrow, you get a new car. It depends if you're getting more quickly than you're losing. So we need to have an idea of what you have so that we can recommend better on what you get. So I think what I want us to work on is the members will ask some questions. We don't want us to be, no information that you may feel is sensitive or otherwise. You know, if that was the case, we would go in camera. But generally speaking, we need an idea of whether or not you have the resources you need to fight crime. Because we all want to see this thing defeated. So, you know, I throw it back out at you. I think the real question is just getting a clear idea of what's happening with the whole issue of mobility of the police force.
Mr.
So I go back. If we can start from there, maybe we can.
So, Mr. Chairman, over several financial years, we have seen a consistent increase in the budgetary provisions for mobility.
So that means that we have more cars than we did.
The current, so that exactly is intention. The current year.
No, not intention. I'm saying again, one of the problems we have too often with government is that we speak to what should be the outcome. But then when you really ask what the outcome is, that's not what you get. So that's why you hear the member asking, what is the situation now?
All right,
because
so
quite frankly, it is not unusual for your intention not to be the absolute outcome.
Except, Mr. Chairman, that in this case, as it relates to mobility, we have really seen some movement in a positive direction, I have to say. In my opening statement, I advised you that already for this year, we have 175 vehicles. And
yes, but that's the point we're making. That's this year.
I just want to go further, if you allow me, to say that, so 1.3 billion was allocated for vehicles for this year. We have sought $2.4 billion for the next financial year, because we're seeking to procure maybe at least another 300 units. All right? So that is the thinking. We recognize all of those concerns that you have put forward, and we're taking them into consideration.
Is that figure inclusive of the JDF or?
No, just for JCF. Yes.
All right. But again, as I said to you, we have had a problem now for a number of years. And if we're now resolving a problem, I'm happy to hear that. As I say, better late than never. But I was just trying to get some perspective of what the reality is. Because I'm telling you, I may be unusual in this regard, but the cry on the ground from police officers and generally is that they need more mobility.
And actually, Chairman, we are taking a two-pronged approach to this. We recognize that there's a need for more units on the road, but also of equal importance is a need to be able to manage what we have. And that is why we have actually procured a fleet management tracking system, because we recognize that there are some issues administratively that we have to deal with. And that system, without going into details, will go a very far way in helping the police high command to manage their fleet.
We'll come back to that. I have member Stewart and member Dunn and member Phillips in that order.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you to Mr. Simpson.
Mr. Simpson, you spoke eloquently about the effectiveness of the Jamaica Eye program. We know that we can't fool Jamaicans at all because there are many persons on the street who know that some of these cameras are not working. What maintenance schedule do you have in place to ensure that these cameras are up and running as much as possible? Because we know that even the criminals are aware where these cameras are working, what percentage of the cameras across the island are working effectively. Secondly, the attrition rate of the police force has increased significantly. We know that there was a public spat recently between the chairman of the Police Federation and another high-ranking officer. It has been taken out of the public domain. But what is the true situation now? Is that impacting on the morale of the force where we're having such high attrition rate? And I have a few more questions after you have responded.
1 second. Members, I'm going to ask for efficiency of the discussion because we're kind of moving and we'll keep going back and forth. There are some issues that were asked in terms of Jamaica Eye and staffing. And prior to that, we were having a discussion on the vehicles. I'm going to ask that we just break it down and just have a discussion on Jamaica Eye. If members have anything have to say, then we can do the staffing and the vehicles, in whichever order. But let us deal with...
When you go on to the vehicle, there are some questions I'd asked Mr. that he had not yet answered about the legislation, for example, and where they were.
And we are ready to respond to that.
All right. So members, let me just, because as I said, we're
just remind you. You can come back to it if you wish.
So
after the
if we may, if members agree, the legislation first. Can we get the response to Member Jackson? Then, seeing as we're having the discussion on motor vehicles, I would just ask us to just complete that so that we don't have to go back. Then Jamaica Eye, and then some staff issues. We can have those if any members want to, when we're on a topic, seek clarity or we'll deal with that. And then afterwards, as I said, after our members done Phillips and Vaz after that. So let us, I invite you to respond in terms of the legislation.
All right.
Do you want to repeat what was the question? Yeah, on legislation. What are you?
What are the pieces of legislation being developed now? And specifically to regarding the MOCA regulations, which is outstanding.
Yes, okay.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Please allow our legal officer, Mr. Paul Bailey. He has been integral in those efforts, and he will respond accordingly. I know that the MOCA regs, that is progressing, and also work is being done on the Firearms Act, the amendment of the Firearms Act. But he will speak more definitively to the whole suite of legislation.
So those are the two things that are being done.
He will speak accordingly.
Now. All right.
It's currently before the committee.
Yeah.
Is there?
So, Mr. Chairman, so as it concerns the MOCA regulations, we're in the final stages of settling the bill. It is our hope to have it before LegCom by February, so we could have it before the House in short order. As it concerns the firearms amendment, we're also in the final stages of settling the bill. It is our hope to have it before LegCom by March, but we're still unsure as to that date.
Just, don't want a long, but the MOCA regulations are really formalizing the structures, reporting, etc.
It's really formalizing the code of conduct. So the regulations are in regards to the code of conduct. So ensuring that the MOCA officers have certain standards that they're expected to abide by in operating, in fulfilling their official duties.
Okay.
Yes. So once that is passed, because I believe the intention is to have those regulations in place and then bring the...
And MOCA will continue to report to the Commissioner of Police, or is there...
No. The intention is for MOCA to be an independent agency existing on their own.
So it would report to nobody? I'm just asking. Yes. Yes.
Mr. Chair, if I may just interject at this stage. The intention is for MOCA to report to an oversight body. And in fact, one of the components of the regulations is the function and establishment of that said body, how it works and what the relationship would be. The code of conduct is the first component of the regulations that has been focused on, and it is virtually complete. I am told it's now doing essentially the rounds to finalize it. So hopefully it will be ready in short order for tabling.
Well, that's optimistic. Yes, and the second is the firearms.
The Firearms Act.
And that is to deal with?
That is to deal with, that is to deal with the entity, Firearm Licensing Authority, ensuring that their functions are streamlined and they are performing the necessary functions to manage the firearms industry. That is one of the main things that we're doing under the Firearms Act. As it concerns, for instance, the National Police Act, because I remember the question being asked about what are we doing to shore up and to provide better powers and more appropriate powers to our constabulary force. So we have the National Police Act, which seeks to repeal and replace the Constabulary Force Act that is also in train. The cabinet submission has been done, and as I believe, as far as I'm aware, it is being reviewed and finalized as well. And that's as far as I'm aware, as it concerns the National Police
Member
Act.
Jackson, but wasn't there some discussion, I think Attorney General and Minister of National Security, wasn't there some question as to whether or not we needed some legislation that would be between what is a state of emergency and a MOCA that would give some of the powers that would detention, that govern JCF, etc., that would allow us to accomplish the crime-fighting activities without the need for a state of emergency? Wasn't that something promised like a year ago?
Very much. That's what I alluded to in the beginning. That was agreed to between the government and the opposition
Simpson,
from January last year.
Is there anything in train with that at all?
All right. I think that we would have to consult further on that.
Well, if you have to consult, it's not something that's actively being worked on then.
It may have been raised, but I'm not sure that it has actually moved on from that.
No, but Mr. Simpson, the question being asked, and your colleague, what's his name?
Paul Bailey.
Mr. Bailey, you indicated that Mr. Bailey is dealing with the legislative agenda.
He is part of the team that is working on the legislation.
So the chairman's question is, Mr. Bailey's team dealing with any such legislation?
As I'm aware, the National Police Service Act, one of the amendments, well, some of the considerations there are some of the powers that we need to give the police officers, the members of the constabulary force. What are the appropriate powers that they need to perform their functions properly?
No, but Member Jackson, why I have a concern with this is that I may have been misguided in my, or I may have misunderstood what I heard. Let me be a little more clear. But my understanding was that after repeated discussions over the state of emergency, we had been told that the state of emergency, the powers needed, we only got them under a state of emergency. So we had indicated that we thought that the zones of special operations would have encompassed it. We heard that no, those did not. So there was an agreement when the first state of emergency came about, where we had indicated that they would find and they would get support, the government would get support about amending the legislation so that we could find that in between, because many persons are uncomfortable with a state of emergency but find that there is no alternative. Therefore, let's just move quickly on doing the legislation. And my understanding was the government was actively seeking to work on that in between, that legislation that would cover it. So I'm surprised now to hear that we are not doing that at all.
You are correct. You are correct. And that's what I was attempting to find out from Mr. Simpson in terms of the menu of legislations being developed along that line, specifically to deal with the alternatives to the SOE.
Well,
and that's why I returned to the subject.
I don't know that we can go much further because we're being told that that is not being done as a specific project at this point in time.
But certainly at this point in time, it is not. However, it is part of the legislative agenda to come up with that type of legislation that you spoke about.
But we're 2 years into state of emergencies. It's
Yes,
obviously not being worked on with any urgency.
Chairman, the thing is, there is a significant need for varying pieces of legislation. And at the same time, we have to consider the whole architecture that participates in that process, namely the chambers, the Chief Parliamentary Council, and other entities. And so it is something that we plan to treat with in due course, but just in terms of priority, others are ahead of it with the queue.
Mr. With your permission, Mr. Simpson, I honestly don't believe you believe what you just said. If national security is the #1 challenge that faces the country, and you have sought to institute states of emergency, which is the most extreme legal instrument in the security architecture, and over 2 years, you have not sought to advance those pieces of legislation. What else is more important to Jamaica than the security issue? And you have not touched that yet? But yet you say that it's an important area and you're going to make best efforts? And other things are being done. When you need state of emergency to be passed, you come here with haste. Haste. Right? That's what you do. That's why I say, honestly, I don't think you believe what you just said.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I truly believe that the amendments that are being done to the Constabulary Force Act by way of the National Police Act will address some of the concerns that you have in.
You say that now, you don't even know when that's coming. We're talking about
No,
SOE
well, all right. If you want to, let's explore it. What are these changes that you think will address it?
In terms of the powers of the members of the Constabulary Force Act, the powers of search, the power of seizure, the powers of arrest. So the consideration in some of the amendments being done, how far can the powers go without actually infringing individuals' rights, or if it is that it's infringing rights, that they are demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society?
Mr. Chairman, that is not fully the story. It's not the power of arrest. You have those powers already. The issue was for the period of detention.
Yes.
Because you can already arrest.
We can already arrest.
You can arrest on suspicion.
But that is also a part of the amendments, because as it is now in the Constabulary Force Act and in the Constitution, there is some prescription as to how long the detention is supposed to take place.
So, Mr. Bailey, you're saying that after 2 years, you have not yet arrived at a set of proposals, legislative proposals, to deal with those provisions. Is that what you're saying now?
I'm saying that it's still being settled. There's something on the table, but it is still being settled.
For 2 years now, it's still unsettled.
Yes.
Is that so, yes or no?
I would accept that in light of the process, how it operates. We have to consult with the Attorney General and Chambers. We have to consult with the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Council.
And for 2 years, you have been making those consultations, and you haven't yet come to a conclusion. And yet you have a problem of crime and murders.
Mr. Bailey, please, I don't think, look, Mr. Simpson, understand our frustration. This is a serious matter. For nearly 2 years, we have been going on with states of emergency. Commitments were given to look at these things in terms of policy. We thought when the zones of special operations were brought, we thought it would have resolved some of the problems. We heard that it needed more. There was a consensus to work and give support to find some in-between space that we did not have to have states of emergency almost blanketing the country with suspension of persons' civil rights, and to get some legislation of this nature in place. I'm saying that it would have been my thought and the thought of some of our colleagues here that the ministry would have a specific legislation and would be fast-tracking something of this nature.
But Chairman...
No, please, let me finish. Fast-tracking something of this nature because it is urgent and it is a national priority. I'm simply saying it's not something that, and I don't think you should try and defend it generally. These are policy decisions. But what is coming out is that there is no specific urgency to deal with that. And unless you can say, yes, there is.
I wouldn't say that, Mr. Chairman. As you have heard from our legal officer, several consultations are ongoing.
Yes, but this is with the National Police Act.
Because any legislation that could involve the suspension or reduction of human rights, it has to be subject to significant consultations. So it's just a part of the process. In the ministry, we are engaging that process as best as possible, and we're hoping for the speediest conclusion. But it is not solely within the remit of the ministry to develop legislation, as you are very much aware.
I, for one, certainly am dissatisfied with either the pace or the manner in which it is being dealt with, just hearing from what we're getting here.
That is taken,
and as I said, we would push this up to the policy level, because, as I said, it is an issue that we have to deal with. But what members is obvious is that there is, in the very foreseeable future, there's no alternatives that will be developed.
Along that point,
those lines,
Mr. Chairman,
to fight crime.
It's DCP Fitzbailey. Your force and the JDF has recommended to the Prime Minister the SOE. And one of the basis of the reliance on the SOE is the powers that it provides of detention, etc. Is it the view of the JCF that in the absence of any alternative legislative provisions, the SOE is the only thing that you will be pursuing to deal with the levels of crime in the country?
Let me say that the intention of the SOE is to cauterize violence. It's not necessary to solve crime. We operate the SOE with all other types of police activities, including investigations. In fact, if you will allow me, let me recognize the chair. My apologies. During the deliberation with Mr. Simpson, I'm just going to give you some data. Cocaine seizure for this year, last year, has been the highest for the past 15 years. In fact, not only the highest for the past 15 years, but from an individual perspective, we have made the largest seizure since 2002. To reinforce the point that Mr. Simpson made, that the assets that have been acquired have definitely been assisting us in terms of the law enforcement or law enforcement engagement significantly in terms of the seizure, that's in terms of our border. And we as a law enforcement agents, we are not saying that the state of emergency is the only way. We use the state of emergency plus other.
you have another alternative that you could use? You say it's not the only.
But we continue to do normal policing.
No, without
along.
it, could you do it?
The state of emergency, in my view, as I said, it suppresses violence. It does not solve crime.
My question to you, DCP, in the absence of the SOE, do you have any other means of suppressing what the SOE, you said, violence allows you?
I can't, I'm not going to say, because we're looking at a toolbox.
But
and the SOE is one of the tools in the box.
Yeah,
but there are several other tools that can be utilized.
My question to you again, DCP.
Yes,
DCP. You know all the tools in the toolbox. If you take out the SOE, are you saying all the rest of tools cannot achieve the reduction in violence?
I'm not saying that, sir.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that the SOE enhance what we are doing, but we have other tools that we use.
And let me ask my question again. If the SOE is not available to you, if it is not available to you, because Parliament has to pass it, if it's not available to you, there's nothing in the toolkit that can allow you to reduce violence?
There are several things that we use, sir. And I'm saying that without the SOE, we have to continue our normal policing.
And that would reduce violence? Those other things?
Everything that we use, the intention is to reduce violence.
No, don't make that simple things seem difficult, DCP.
It's very difficult.
No, you say you have a toolkit, a toolbox.
Yes, sir.
Amongst the tools in the toolbox is SOE. If the SOE tool is taken out, are you telling us that you will be unable to reduce violence?
No, I'm not saying we have to.
Okay, you're not saying that. You're not saying that.
Can I, sir? Our responsibility as law enforcement is to ensure that our citizens are the fear of crime and crime itself is reduced. That's our responsibility.
Yes, and I know
we
that.
serve, protect, and reassure. So if we don't have the SOE, we'll have to continue to utilize whatever we have to minimize and reduce crime in every respect.
Drawing on what you just said, without the SOE, using all the other tools available, you can reduce violence so that you can serve and protect the Jamaican people.
Can I resort to some data, sir?
No,
if
just answer the question first, then you can give me the data.
I will use the data to answer the question.
No, answer the question and give the data to support the answer. No, I am posing the question.
Yeah, all right.
I pose the question I want to have answered.
Yes.
I'm just
I
going
have a straight question, My question is simple. If you take out the SOE out the toolbox, definitively, can you use the remaining tools to reduce crime and violence? That's my simple question. It's either yes or no. Then you can give the data and whatever to qualify the yes or no.
We have used other things in the past, curfew, but there are limitations. If you look at the data that we have, and
Mr. DCP, you haven't answered the question yet. My question is, if you take out SOE out the toolbox, can you reduce crime and violence using the remaining tools that you have? Yes or no?
we have used other method.
The answer, is it yes or no, Mr. DCP?
DCP.
Okay, it will be much more difficult to do it without the SO.
But it can be done.
It can be done,
okay.
But it will be much more difficult.
And if it's more difficult to be done, can you identify what other things you will need to make it less difficult?
Well, you made reference to the legislative framework that we need additional legislation.
So if those
to
are in
support-
place, it will
support.
make it less difficult to achieve.
It will support. It will support.
So
the effort.
the longer the legislation take to be done, it causes you to rely more on SOE then. Is that so?
No, that's not what I'm saying, sir.
No,
That's
but
what
you
I'm
just
saying.
told me. No, you just told me that if you take out SOE, right, you can reduce crime and violence, but it will be more challenging, and I take that. But one of the things you said that would make it less difficult to achieve in the absence of SOE is some legislative reform.
Yes,
is that
yes, I agree, but I don't want us to see crime in isolation and violence. The fact is there are a lot of variables that impact on our reality.
Those are always there, a multiplicity of variables. But no, I just want to be clear with the answer that you give. That's why I'm really pressing. No, I just want clarity in my own mind. I like things in a simple, straightforward way.
All right.
Mr.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm not certain. The request you're making, I'm not certain exactly which is the question.
The question is, Mr. ACP, DCP Bailey indicated, Chairman, that crime and violence can be reduced without the SOE, but to do so, it would be a bit more challenging. I then asked the question, what could be done to reduce those challenges and those difficulties? And he indicated legislative changes are among those things that could make crime reduction possible without SOE. My further question to him...
Before you jump to the further, just for clarity, for those of us who are laypersons and not lawyers, and I take it this committee really doesn't have... today. All the lawyers have taken leave. Yes, the lawyers have taken leave. But just for my clarity, the issue that I understand was really twofold. One, the length of detention was an issue which had a problem with the zones. And secondly, that there was perceived to have been some lack of clarity as to the role of the JDF in the crime fighting without a state of emergency. Are those the two issues, or am I, again, misled in my understanding? Are those the two basic problems with the legislation, or is it a wider slew of things? And I'm not asking you to go into all of them, but...
Yes, sir. When you look at the current reality in Jamaica, we are not normal in terms of our crime rates. If you look at it from a global perspective, even from within the region, the average murder rate per 100,000 is way in, we can consider ourselves as being in a civil war.
Yeah.
Until we normalize our situation, our reality, the SOE plays a temporary, it's a temporary measure. I'm one of those persons who do not believe in the continuing restriction of persons' liberty. But when we look at our reality, we are in a crisis. Even if we have legislative changes which we believe will enhance what we are doing, it is going to take some time to attain to the level that we would want to attain to. From an investigative perspective, for instance, when you call on the Jamaican police to investigate in excess of 1,400 murders. And this is, I wanted to look at the data from 2010. The murder figure in 2010 was over 1,400. The lowest we have had since was in 2014, when we had 1,005. And it has been like a roller coaster, up and down, right through the period. So even if we reduce it to 1,005, that's not normal for a society like ours. So whatever measures are necessary, whilst we believe in the freedom of movement of everybody or person's constitutional right, but we have to make a decision. And from a law enforcement perspective, we believe that every tool that is available, be it the amendment in the legislative framework, be it the imposition of special measures, that is very important in terms of us reducing crime.
Chair.
Whilst we have the other modernization of the JCF in terms of getting the appropriate technology that is required, whilst it is important for us to ensure that we have better accountability framework within the JCF, for example, how our resources are deployed and how do we monitor the resources, those are very important. We have to basically link all of them together in terms of what we are doing.
Sure. DCP, without belaboring the point, a state of emergency is always a last resort, and it has been there on the table for many years. To not have to resort to it, legislation was made to allow for zones of special operations. So when that was put in place, everyone was like, well, let's see how that works. 6 months later, in the same place that you had the zone, you now declare a state of emergency. So obviously the zone wasn't working. We still don't want to have to resort to the last resort, which is a state of emergency. So point is that somewhere, if the zone which was supposed to be the sort of in-between, that you didn't have to go to the last resort, but that this could work, there must be some analysis to find out why, what is the deficiency of the legislation of a zone of special operations that made it not work. My understanding, and I repeat it again, was A, issues to do with the functioning of the JDF on the streets, and B, issues to do with the length of time of detention. So the question was, we were going to change the legislation to incorporate those so that we could use that type of legislation instead of
the umbrella
and keep a final
suspension.
resort. Because as a man said to me, it would be very interesting, because if a hurricane hits Jamaica tomorrow, are you going to put a state of emergency on top of the state of emergency? We already have a state of emergency. We have nowhere else to go. So the point I'm making is simple. I think this is the crux of it. Are we wrong in that those are the major deficiencies, or is it more? And I'm not saying maybe I don't have all the information here, but it would be, I think, important for us to be able to get that, because from a policy perspective, we were waiting. That's what we were kind of waiting on. We understand now that that is not on the front burner. So basically, until you can get the numbers down, and they're not moving as
they're not going down, they're going up.
So the problem is that it looks like we're just going to be in a state of emergency in perpetuity.
But Chairman, before you get, just to augment the point you made, that where you had a Zozo, like in Mount Salem, and 6 months after, you now had a state of emergency, which is broader and have more forceful power.
So now you have both.
You have both. But worse, Mr. Chairman, in an era that they have state of emergency, they now have curfew, which is less powerful than a state of emergency. In Big Lane, in Central Village, you have the most extreme provision of state of emergency, DCP. And you have to put curfew inside of the most potent measure that you have. Now, if you sit here, DCP, and tell us that you want the most extreme measure as the only means, well, let me withdraw that, because you did say that the SOE, you could do it without the SOE. But where you have the SOE, it is still not strong enough. Explain to me why you need a curfew with a state of emergency in Central Village. If that was one last
I would
point.
just say to you, I don't necessarily believe that we, at the committee, we should be going to the operations. It would be, I think, yeah, General. Let me just say, members, I think, and I don't want us to put the High Command. We're trying, and I think at this point, with the members' concurrence, maybe what we need is if you could just give us a report on the deficiencies of the existing legislation without a SOE, and what it is that, because that's what we thought we were, this is what I was expecting at any moment to come, because the next thing that's going to happen, I mean, we have, for the last 3 months, we've been hearing every now and then, every time we come to an extension, we hear that we're going to get a number of zones of special operations. And I've heard 8, 20, many things. But the point is, my problem is, are we going to get zones inside of a state of emergency? Are we going to get zones without a state of emergency? And then are we going to have the same problem that existed while we had to move from the zone to the state of emergency? It looks to me that we just have a little ambiguity, a little cloudiness in how
Mr.
this
Chairman,
is being dealt with.
We're undertaking to provide you with that report, and I'm hoping that at that point you will have a clearer idea as to how the ministry, the JCF, intends to move forward.
I wouldn't mind having one from the ministry. I know you work very closely, but given the role of the JCF, I would like to hear also from their perspective, because it might, in other words, what we really want is the deficiencies, because what we're really looking at is the difficulties under which they're operating. So, members, if we may.
Last comment, I just want to just clarify, DCP. When I made the comment about the curfew that you have instituted in a SOE declared area, and you before said you need that extreme measure of the state of emergency, is it unreasonable to say that the assessment of the JCF in recommending the state of emergency as the only tool it can use to contain, reduce violence is wanting? Because you have to now call on a less powerful tool of curfew. No, I love DCP too. Since you are the professional police.
We are not saying that it is the state of emergency. We have never said that it was the only. It is one of the tools that can be used. In terms of the declaration of the curfew in Central Village, I have actually spoken to the commander regarding it, and I did know that this will come up. That's the only thing I will say in respect of.
You know, as I said, Chairman, the reason I raise it because a lot of persons have called me to ask me, they said to me, MP, you are voting for state of emergency in Parliament because the police says they need more power, and you give them the extreme power, and they are not being effective with the most extreme. How are they going to be more effective with a less extreme measure, with a curfew? And I had a difficulty answering the person. So that's why I raised it this morning, that I can go back to my constituents and answer the question, because you are more adept at the security operations and arrangement than I am. So help me to advise my constituent. Don't let Mr. Simpson tell you that it will be dealt with, you know. This is a real question they ask me.
Yes.
When I understand the concern, sir, but with the state of emergency, we are governed by regulation, and I know that some allowances were actually given.
No, those expired from the 6th of January.
No,
the opening hours.
No, that is for that's a noise abatement act you're referring to.
Yeah. No, the opening hours was the only amendment made, and that expired on the 6th of January, separate and apart from the noise abatement.
Yes, but I think that act.
So you were not being properly
that
advised
act
on
remained
that.
until the end of the noise abatement.
Yes.
Until the end of this month.
Yes.
So when you impose a curfew, it actually supersedes that.
No, the Noise Abatement Act deal with the hours.
The opening hours.
Or
yes.
opening hours.
Yes.
Right? For it was done for the Christmas period. But I don't think you're suggesting, though, that is the change in the Noise Abatement Act why you need a curfew in Big Lane.
No, I'm not saying that. That could be one of the reasons.
That could be one of the reasons.
Among you know, you are telling me that there has been the regulation expired on the 16th of January.
Under the regulations of the state of emergency, the Noise Abatement Act obtains across the country.
Yes.
But the regulation under the state of emergency supersede those. No, the provisions in the state on the areas declared in the state of emergency supersedes all other legislative provisions. That is how powerful the SOE is.
But I think there was some concession in terms of when that legislation was.
Not exclusive to the SOE areas. It's right across the country.
Right across. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Right across.
But I'm saying the SOE regulation gives the commanding officer, right, the power to supersede those provisions. That's why it's a state of emergency. It suspends all other normal regulation. Yeah. It's a constitutional power.
Yes, but if you look at the reality that there's just a defined space in which the curfew was implemented, and so one of the requirements is that you have to announce that, and the public become aware that there is a curfew. In the state of emergency, when you give certain extension, in order to change that for that specific defined area, the police would have to go around and maybe use
DCP, my sympathies are with you.
No, it's not.
My sympathies are with you.
Okay.
And my sympathies are with you and the JCF members.
For me, I think the important part is that, you know, DCP said that he was waiting on that question, and I take it that all Fitzes think alike. So he was waiting.
I will take the fifth on this one. But he must be a good man because this part of his name is Fitz.
The members, as I said, I'm going to finish off with legislative, which includes state of emergencies. If there are any questions in this, because I'm going to move on to the motor vehicles. Member Vaz, this has to do with state of emergency and SO and legislative. So, are any other questions regarding this? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming out. I'd like to say on behalf of the people of Jamaica, we thank you very much for your service and the dedication that you have brought to crime fighting in Jamaica. It's also great to sit here with agencies like INDECOM, MOCA, JCF, and I'm not sure if anybody from JDF is here, but at least in 2020, we can all come together and discuss this monster that we have called crime. My thoughts on state of emergency now and question is, one, I believe that there is a flawed discussion by some persons, and I use some persons, on the effectiveness of the state of emergency. Because how do you define effectiveness as far as one of member mentioned before in terms of empirical evidence? In all areas that the SOE is in, there's a reduction in all major crime and criminal activity. So that speaks to the effectiveness of it. And two, why the discussion is so flawed is because if you ask anybody in these areas and the general public sentiments of the effectiveness of state of emergency, persons will say that it is very effective. So the discussion has been so flawed about the effectiveness of crime fighting measures. But if you look at the state of emergency in itself, it is very effective. My question is, and my hope is, one, that I do share the sentiments of some person in law enforcement, Chairman, that the state of emergency should be everywhere across Jamaica, because this is not normal times. And therefore we'll need measures that are not normal. The other thing to define the effectiveness of this is that we have a public defender's office. And in that office, I mean, every measures have been taken to ensure that public rights is affected and not affected. And therefore, we have the oversight body of the public defender that speaks to that. So again, the discussion is flawed. So my question is...
of the public... all right, yes.
Right, my question is, for ACP Bailey and others, what would prevent you from instituting more state of emergencies?
I am not certain I can answer that question at this time. I think that there has to be consultation between the various security agencies before we can arrive at or make that recommendation. So I really couldn't answer it now, and I guess it depends on what is happening within the various spaces and parishes.
Well, on that note, I think just following up, a state of emergency really has two elements, would be the human resource constraints that you would have, and I understand it's stretched to the limit even with what you have. But secondly, yes, beyond the limit. But secondly, there's a cost associated with it. Do you have the costs of the state of emergency? I'm sure like BCP Bailey you anticipated.
Chairman, I think we have some estimates as to what the cost has been so far. Our Director of Budget and Finance in the JCF, Mr. Cahoon, will speak to those.
All right, thank you, Mr. Simpson. So, Chair, we're projecting that it will cost a total of 525 million as that day for the financial year. That's April 2019 to March 2020. As at December 2019, total expenditure was approximately 392 million. And that's for the period April 2019 to December 2019.
So let me understand something. A state of emergency has the police, soldiers, just persons who are normally working in our security forces. They have the equipment, they have all this, the operating, the motor vehicles, etc. So this 525 that you give us here would simply be the additional cost for, say, food,
That's
lodging.
correct.
It is only to be able to move people to different places. It is not to add any additional personnel or otherwise to the operations.
No, it's not to add any additional persons. From the financial standpoint, though, we note an increase in primarily meals, accommodation, and we have to set up temporary structures, the portaloos, and the different temporary measures are put in place which come at an additional cost.
Okay. Are there any other questions on state of emergency?
Thank you, Chairman. While I'm not as enthusiastic as my colleague about having it across the island, my major concern about the whole issue of a state of emergency is that, yes, we understand the importance of it, but the results that you should be getting by curtailing the rights of persons we are not getting. The issue I'm having is the intelligence section of the force. Because, yes, we understand you can detain persons for as long as you want because of the state, and yes, I know you have detained persons who need to be detained. But the problem we are facing is if it is lifted tomorrow morning, all of these persons would come back on the street because there is no information to actually charge these persons. So even though you know that these persons are persons committing activities of criminal activities, we don't have sufficient resources and information to get them charged. So the issue I'm having, as I said, and I want to know if there has been for example, a budget put in place which I would have been presented now to, since we're coming up to budget time now, with regards to bolstering the intelligence section of the force. And you're talking about resources as in, like, for example, personnel also. Because I think special training has to be, we have to look at special training for persons who are going to be involved in these activities. Currently, we're all aware of the trust factor that people have with the police while certain information is not coming. What are you putting in place to solve those particular issues? Because those are the main issues why we are not getting anywhere, as in results from the same state of emergency. Because you lock up the persons, but at the end of the day, you can't charge most of them, because there's not sufficient information to charge them. So it goes to where the intelligence section is obviously not working. Something is going wrong that we need to change. So I don't know what you have been looking at. We know we're looking at the DNA things with regards to that particular perspective. We don't know the anti-gang legislation. I'm hoping it should be dealing with things that, in addition to the regular witness thing that we normally use. So what are the different things that are being put in place now that go and bolster that section of the force? And what is the estimated cost of doing this? And have we presented that so far to the persons in charge so we can ensure that this is accommodated in the budget that is to come in short order?
Whilst I concur with some of this sentiment expressed, our statement that there is room for improvement in our intel, but I think of the culture that exists in Jamaica, as you rightly said, that in many instances we know who are the perpetrators. And whilst we rely on scientific evidence, but scientific evidence can take us so far and no more. I think we have to have, as a nation, we have to have a conversation for individuals to understand that they have a responsibility as well to support law enforcement and ensure that the rule of law is maintained. the culture of informer for dead is significantly impacting on our investigative capacity and capability. We have the witness protection program that is available, and a lot of people are not willing to accept the offer. And one can understand because you have to change a number of things, but it's something that we have to encourage people because of the level of violence that exists in our society. So you are correct that in many instances we know, and even some of those persons who are incarcerated, we know that they are involved, and we can say what crime they are involved in. But until witnesses are willing to come forward, and we talk about the trust factor, which is, yes, real, but there are many avenues that are available in which persons can tell the security forces what has happened, and without any breach of trust. I want to point out in terms of intel, though, that it's not everything we say and we cannot disclose. But on an average, threat to life, we have saved in excess of 400 persons every year. An average threat to life, which the public is not really aware of. And it is because of the intelligence mechanism that we have in place.
Just to add, I know the cultural thing I mentioned, really informal to death culture, that's going to take a generational change.
Yes.
So we know this is a long-term thing and we have to start now, naturally. But for immediately speaking, yes, I know the intelligence section, you said it's working to an extent. But apart from even depending on the witness to testify, because as I said, a lot of persons aren't using up the witness protection thing. What are the other avenues we're looking at to ensure we can close most of these cases and not to only be dependent solely on the witness aspect of it? I know the anti-gang thing, I'm not sure if the new legislation will bring some of those things into place. So for example, technological things that you might use. I know there are certain levels of equipment that the police and the JDF would use to track certain things and get certain information. We know all of that. But what I'm saying, are all of these things now being able to be put as evidence to ensure that we can use things outside of just depending on a witness testimony to actually close most of these cases? Because as I said, we're having a serious issue with that part of it, because if you have one particular person who have seen everything, it's highly likely with our court system, by the time the case is supposed to close, most times they can't find a witness anymore. You don't know where they are. So at the end of the day, we have to find other mechanisms to use. So what are we putting in place immediately? So by the time we have the cultural change, we can know that we were already doing these things so we can catch up in the long run with what we are doing immediately.
There's a significant investment in forensic, both traditional forensic, communication forensic, cyber forensic, and that is actually assisting us significantly in some of our investigations. You made reference to the anti-gang. We have 145 members that have been charged and are in custody as we speak under the legislation. We have impacted significantly in terms of I wouldn't say we have dismantled, but we have disrupted significantly some of the gangs. And I need to point out also that some of the cases that are before the court, whilst the evidence is not that strong to support cases of murder, but the anti-gang legislation, when we weigh the balance, instead of going for the murder charge, we go for the charges under the anti-gang legislation.
All right, members, hold on. Members, we have a number of things. All right, I want to move on. Before I go, and I'm not really asking for a lot of comment on it, but I'm trying to break down what, in a sort of very simplistic way, what Member Vaz was saying. And it's just something that I buck up in discussion every day. For example, there is what we call Checkpoint Charlie by Bluefields White House, going out in Westmoreland. And then you have one these are the checkpoints, Montpelier. So you have these different checkpoints, and they're always there. Now, quite frankly, there are some roads you can just take 3 minutes and drive around it. Anybody who doesn't want to go, everybody knows it's a static checkpoint. So people are really asking, how does, and then you have to have persons manning it, soldiers, police, rifles, all sorts of things, and it's there, but anybody can just go around. So the question that you're constantly asked is, why don't they ever move them once or twice, or is there really a need for it? And secondly, even in the state of emergency, there are issues if you use some of those people and otherwise. There are areas where anecdotally you're hearing this is a problem, that's a problem, and you'd really expect them to go in or lock off those areas. But you're not getting a lot of that. You might get a one or two, but usually as a response to some flare-up. So I think that part of the question is that we have a state of emergency, and the legislation is there, but in terms of the effectiveness of it, there's a feeling on the ground that it is not, there's a sort of complacency. There's work taking place on another level, but it seems like it's almost Norman policing work. And I mean, as I said, I'm very happy with the police that are there and the work they're doing, but I don't know that this brings that added oomph to the crime fighting that we expected. And in a lot of ways, the state of emergency now, 6 months, a year later, is not the same, does not having the same impact it had in a lot of ways as when it first came in. So, and that is in the perceptions of persons. I mean, crime level, murder levels are down, but there's a feeling that it's because a lot of those people have just migrated to an area that's not under a state of emergency. So I make the point that there are questions. I don't know that you're able, and this is the place for it. So that is more of a policy and political discussion in Parliament. But just for the record, that there are some, as I'm sure you're aware.
Mr. Chair, further to the question raised by my colleague from Central Westmoreland, and DCP Fitzbailey had mentioned about the demand and the force and the number of murders to investigate, and that the state of emergency gave you more space, as you said and the Commissioner of Police said oftentimes. But in the data, police data, you have more arrests taking place without, put it this way, let me come back to that. I don't want to quote you the wrong thing, but I want to specifically wanted to point to the capability of intelligence gathering. Right?
Remember, on this, I really, we have some, apart from we were on legislative, I really wanted to move to the vehicles and to the Jamaica Eye, so I don't want us to go off on another tangent and to keep it a little more focused. So unless this is to deal with legislative or the specific. Just briefly, because time is on us.
Chair, I've been listening for quite a while, and it leaves me no more better than when I came here. That we are on the right track. Because I use I made a presentation in Parliament just before the Christmas break. And we see the parish of Manchester had an increase in crime year over year last year.
Crime or murders?
Murders, yeah. And I used my own constituency as an example of what is happening. So we have Mile Gully policing area, which is one of the largest in Ireland by square miles. Between 2014 and 2018, we only had 2 murders. And they were both by the cutlass, domestic. But in 2019, we saw 4 shootings, 2 murders, 1 injury, 6 hold up by guns, and we have no police vehicle. We have to borrow from Kendall Police Station. Now, Kendall Police Station was already shot before. We saw where there were 70 individuals from Clarendon that was held in Manchester because you have a state of emergency in Clarendon, so they all come back. And I've always said that we dub communities as some communities as violent communities, and we make no attempt to try and get them to a state or intervention in those communities before they erupt into not being able to be manageable. And listen to the conversation on the whole state of emergency. And I'm a little bit disappointed, Chairman, because while we're talking about suppressing crime itself, the legislative changes are not coming at the same pace. And anything that you keep for more than 1 year is near permanent. It's no longer temporary. And when we are seeing an increase in parishes like Manchester, St. Elizabeth, and not seeing the requisite interventions in those parishes, then you wonder if we're really taking it serious in dealing with the overarching situation on a national level. But a question to you, ACP, are you of the same opinion as the ministry on the crime interruption programs? That they're a failure? Is it the same opinion that the police force has?
Mr. Simpson, if you want to answer, you can.
Yeah, Mr. Simpson, I could ask you the same question too.
But Mr. Simpson not in the JCA.
Okay.
That's true.
I have publicly spoken, and based on my own research, my take, and this is what, when it comes to organized crime, social intervention is not the solution for organized crime. I'm very specific. The international study, if you do all the researches, it will show that when it comes to organized crime, there's no way social intervention activity, the type that we're accustomed to, is going to impact and organize crime.
No, but
all right, but
that's a strong argument.
Yeah, but just I think what you're getting at is that within a gang, organized a gang, social intervention is not the issue. But what I think the other side of it is that there is prevention, that social intervention is, and I'm not certain because I think that the literature is different, that social intervention is something that is an important part of reducing your levels of crime, preventing rather than actually fighting. So I'm not certain whether you're looking at it from a position of fighting it or preventing.
Yeah, I'm not asking about if you're going to use social intervention to fight crime, because it is a policy of the government now with the ZOSO for social intervention. So to say that there is you're contradicting the policy and what. So I'm just asking the question: is the police force in agreement that the crime interruption programs and social intervention programs ought to be cut off of the budget as is being promulgated by the minister now? Is it that that the police force feels that it is not working or it has no place in dealing with the whole situation of crime?
I really cannot answer that question, sir.
Forget what the minister
spoke.
Forget what the minister said. I'm asking the opinion of the police force.
No, but my point is, as I said, and I was specific when it comes to crime for profit, organized crime, crime for profit.
Mr.
When it comes to that, we have
indulgence.
In terms of social intervention program, our take on it. For example, and can I use a community during the deliberation here? There's a particular community in the corporate area that the type of engagement that we got involved in is to ensure that the community is organized and well structured. So you put in the mechanism in place to ensure, for example, citizens association, committee that respond to
social intervention.
Elderly.
Yeah, but hold on.
So I was very specific.
Yeah,
I was very specific when it comes to organized crime. I have asked Mr. Chairman, Capri to do a study, if I may, on Nannyville. Nannyville was one of those communities that was very violent. It's a type of violence that it was not really linked to that organized crime type activity. Is interpersonal relationship, you this person and that sort of thing. And the type of intervention that we did was just to organize the community. For example, a person wants...
And what has been the result of that?
I mean, Nannyville is basically off the map in terms of crime.
So you're saying that there is an important role for social intervention?
That's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm saying that, but I'm saying that when it comes to organized...
No, we never asked the question about organized crime.
Just in policing, general policing, is there a place for the social intervention?
But that's why we have a community safety.
The answer is yes.
That's why we have a community safety.
So the answer is yes, then DCP. Social intervention programs do reduce murders.
There is a place.
Yes, that's what he was asking.
That's all I'm asking.
You should not listen to Mr. Simpson all the time.
All right. Members, all right, let me tell you how I'm going to proceed from here. We've been dealing with legislative. I'm going to just tidy up Jamaica the vehicles, no, please, hold on. The vehicles, I certainly will have had INDECOM here. I don't know if they have some comments they would like to make in terms of themselves and in terms of anything that they may have specific knowledge on in our discussions, give them an opportunity. And then members, if there's anything else, we can determine whether or not we feel that there is a need for further discussion going forward. But so I'm just trying to put us into some structure. I'm trying to leave the legislative, but
so, Chair, I just wanted to wrap up because I didn't
go ahead
because and the reason why ACP why I asked about DCP the social programs, because as I mentioned, let's use Manchester again. We say we have 2 hotspots there, and I keep asking whenever the ministry comes in front of us, why for those other programs, social programs? Why not go into those two hotspots before they become burning spots then? Eh? And since, and out of your own words, that there is a place for social intervention programs. Eh? And since we have the ZOSO, and I want to put it to you, are we doing the same type of, instead of just putting in a little registration for birth certificate, which it has its own place, you know, fixing 2 roads, are we doing the other part of the social intervention in these ZOSOs, as you describe in Nannyville? Eh? And second, is there a place then for the PMI in the overall social intervention program?
In terms of the ZOSO, there's a special agency that treat with those type of engagement. So I really don't want to, you know.
So that would be over on the other side. Hope or one of them other agencies.
We do not do the social type of intervention in the ZOSO.
But you must be, but there's someone from the police must be,
let me
the command must be a part of that program to know that if it is something that it is working, I mean, you must have a say in what is happening.
Member Phillips, let me be more specific on your point.
Yes.
On page 9 of your document, Mr. Simpson, you have here at item 2B, at the establishment of safe community. And then you have Wi-Fi zones, the concept of music, sports, technology, etc., with $227.5 million allocated this year. Has that been spent?
I'll ask Ms. Wittick to comment on that from our finance division.
Afternoon. So, point 2. This was just a proposal that was sent to Ministry of Finance, which was not supported in this year's budget.
So hold on, but what, this document that we got, I thought all of these expenditures.
It's a wish list.
So wait, this is a wish list. This is not. This is not the budget.
Mr. Chairman, let me see if I can help in that regard. This is not the budget
that we got for this year.
No, what you're looking at here is the PS, the Permanent Secretary's budget memo in defense of our submission to the Ministry of Finance and Planning.
For the next financial year?
No, it was for the current financial year.
Yeah, but you know what you got.
Yeah, so why put that in there when you were not?
You know, that's why I had a little difficulty even with the motor vehicles. Your figure here is twice what you were talking about. So you had really asked for twice as much money and got half.
I tell you,
this document.
What we actually got, I'm advised by my team, is on page 17. But we thought it prudent to include in the document what we had requested.
No, but you have not given me what we got.
But Chair,
all I have is what you requested.
I understand that, but it is on page 17, the specifics in terms of what we got.
With all due respect, Mr. Simpson, yes, I'm looking at this until you have said that to us.
Page 17
I would have imagined that this
report
was inside there, because even when you go to page 17, it doesn't break down exactly, because in some instances, some of them don't even start yet. Some of your programs are here under this page 17.
So a question, Ms. Wittick, just for I have in my document, Jamaica I 430 million. Mr. Turn off your, yes. Try it again. Try. No, turn off that one and try yours. No, try yours again. There you go.
So if you turn to page 17.
No. The document I have is a report from the ministry.
Right.
I'm just trying to clarify for my mind. You have Jamaica I CCTV expansion 430 million. Is that
The actual amount that was budgeted is for CCTV? Jamaica I is 530 million.
so? These figures that we have here are not. These are not the correct figures
The current,
for
right.
what we have.
The current figures are on pages 17 to 23.
So why would we not have put the correct figures in the body of the report?
As indicated, Mr. Chairman, the idea was to put before the committee the full information in terms of what we had requested. And
yeah, but then you could have put that. Yeah, but what you should have done is put what you got, and then if you want it as an addendum,
and we
you
take
put
that,
what you requested.
we take that
but what
advice
you
as
have
well.
done is given us what you requested, and then on page 17. And I must tell you, I mean, you have the document in front of you. Page 17, you would need biopic vision to be able to read the figures that have come on page 17, or magnifying glass. Colonel Edwards, I see you straining to try and get. So I'm just saying it really has been a difficult. So for example, on page 9, just to give me an idea, or you have a. This is slightly bigger. So for example, the cyber security initiatives, the figure we have here are different from the figures that actually obtained. So you see in our document here, it says cyber security initiatives 1.5 billion. It would be different from.
We actually, for the JCF, we actually got the 1.5 billion.
Yes. So where is that?
It's on page 18 in the, well, it would have been on page 2 in the document that we're circulating now. Page 2. Under the JCF, cybersecurity, that's item, the second item, cybersecurity for the JCF.
All right.
And we would have expended 1.2 billion.
1.2?
Yes.
What we're going to have to do, Mr. Simpson, is what this does is create a lot of confusion because some figures are true, some are down, some might actually be up. But for our committee, which our job is to monitor the expenditure in the current year, and this is late in the year, so we are really trying to find out what has been spent. This methodology is not going to, is unacceptable. What we would need is for you to put the areas of budget
Mr.
as
Chairman,
you have here, and to put what you received, meaning even in the preamble that's written to us, and how far you have reached in your process.
And that is taken, Mr. Chairman. But just to say that, so going forward, we can amend how we submit the report accordingly. However, all the information that you need to make the determinations that you need to make, they are contained in this version of the document. So we're circulating some that are more legible, so to speak.
Okay, yes. I want to tell you, Mr. Simpson, only marginally more legible.
I concede, Chairman.
Yes.
But if that's the case, then, Chair, then if you go to page 25, the issue of meals for operation, which you have approved budget of 44,500,000, but you have spent up to September 58 million.
Can speak to that. Remember, at the start of the financial year, we wouldn't have had the knowledge of the state of emergencies. So this was regularized in supplementary.
At the beginning of the financial year.
Right, that's why we have a budget of 44 million, because we wouldn't have been budgeting for state of emergency.
So this now is wrapped up in the discussion that we had about the cost of state of emergency.
No, but Chair, just if you, with what you have given to us, this says excluding state of public emergency activities.
Oh, well, at the bottom of the page, you'll see the actual state of emergencies by parish and the expenditures.
No, but just reading this, your expenses for state of emergency will be separate from this by what is included in this report. It says excluding the state of emergency activities.
I'm clear now, Member Phillips, apologies. So up top, we actually have excluding state of public emergencies. All right, so the meals, what would spike the meals expenditure for this are other special operations.
So you'd have eaten out some of the state of emergency in this?
No, it's separate and apart. We won't have eaten out state of emergency. It's separate and apart. So outside of the state of emergency, the police also has a
So this was taken care of, this line item was taken care of in the
supplementary estimates, that's correct.
Not this one, but the other. And you have adequate amount, because when I look at this second supplementary, there's nothing in it for meals at all, or operations.
Right, it was taken care in the first supplementary, and we'd have to reallocate internally.
And for in the same section, hotel accommodation, 25 million was also was budgeted, but you have spent over 133.
Similar, we have other specialized operation.
Specialized operation that was staying in a hotel?
Right, so Mr. Clark can speak more to the operational side, but from a financial standpoint, we have several deployments from Kingston to the western end to support operations there, and these are specifically specialized operations. That's all I can say from a financial
standpoint.
So
what is it that is spent then on the state of emergency for accommodation? If this is outside of...
Yeah, you should have a separate list.
Yeah, because if this is outside of the state of emergency and you're spending 133 million on hotel accommodation, what is being spent on hotel accommodation then, or accommodation overall for the state of emergency?
For state of emergencies, accommodation as at December 31st is 184 million.
184 million.
Approximately.
So this,
for meals, okay.
So this 133 should be added to this then?
That's correct. For hotel accommodation.
And meals?
As it says, it's outside, it is excluding
yes.
state.
No, I get that.
And
meals?
for meals, 168 million approximately.
That's for the state of emergency?
Specifically the state of emergency.
168 million.
As at the end of December.
And what did you get in the supplementary budget to bolster the meals outside of the state of emergency?
If you have the supplementary estimate, the second supplementary.
It will be the first supplementary.
Or in the first supplementary.
Because the second one is just tabled.
Right, so the first supplementary, I know a total of 400 and just over 400 million. Where is it? 273 million.
273 million was...
For state of emergency. The breakdown we do not have right now, so that will include hotel accommodation.
No. Hold on.
The first supplementary?
You said that the figure of 44 million, or 58 million, you said that addition was taken care of in the first supplementary budget. Huh? This 58 million is up to September 30th. Right? That is outside of the state of public emergency. So how much is it that you're expecting to spend on meals for the financial year by up to the end of the financial year outside of the state of public emergency? And was that, because the figure you just gave me was for the state of emergency in the supplementary. So I want you to break them down outside of state of emergency and for the state of emergency.
Projections outside of the state of emergency for meals, we're looking at approximately 85 million. But then that's just a rough estimate, because that's totally up to the operational side and what may be required.
What is generally budgeted for it?
What
like
is
previous
budget?
financial year?
What you're seeing here is consistent, 45 million. That's what is usually budgeted.
So we're basically doubling up.
Pretty much. So there's obviously increased operational.
And why I ask the question, we're going 2 years now into a state of emergency. The previous financial year, you would have spent 44 million. Right?
Speaking outside of state of emergency,
Yeah.
right? Right, good.
Yeah. Right? So and now you're doubling up outside of a state of emergency, budgeting probably 85 million. Right? So have we doubled up all our operations that the meal numbers would double? Yeah, is it?
That's a question, member, on the operational side, and I think that's best deferred to law enforcement.
Wants to answer. Yeah.
Yes, member, it is so. Especially at the commencement of an operational effort, there are usually increased numbers to take charge of the ground, take charge of the areas, and yes, the numbers would increase.
Yeah, but this is outside of the state of emergency, ACP. This figure that he is giving, that we have got, is outside of the state of emergency, not for the state of emergency.
Well,
and are you feeding more men?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to reconcile the figures that are reported by finance. You know, but I can speak to what happens on the ground. I don't know, you know, where the budget is applied, but I thought that you were speaking about more boots on the ground or more people being available in the particular
Let me break it down, because in the budget that has been presented to us, the approved budget for 2019-2020 is 44,500,000 for meals, for operations outside of the state of emergency. Up to September, 58 million has been spent, September last year. And we are now being told that it is budgeted that you spend up to 85 million, when the norm is generally between 44 and 48 million dollars. So I'm asking the question on an operational side, are we doing twice the amount of operation, or do we have twice the amount of boots on the ground doing operations outside of the state of emergency? Why the budget would have doubled for this financial year?
Well, yes, we are doing both.
And the reason why I'm asking the question, because if I'm to go by the reports where police officers are saying that even during the state of emergency, that them are dead for hungry. They're not getting meals on time and everything, and if we are doubling the expenditure, then that shouldn't be the complaint.
Well, we are doing both. Yes, operations have increased inside the state of emergency and outside as well. I'm accepting that in both places. Somebody mentioned earlier that there has been displacement in criminals, and so yes, we have had to go to places where that fall outside of the state of emergency to do operations.
So you're doing more operations this financial year compared to 2018?
We are.
Okay.
No, but I still don't. Still not so clear.
Still not resting well, but
yeah. But the meal item, ACP, is about feeding certain number of persons wherever they are. It's a meal budget. So I could only contemplate it going up if you have more men to feed. And you don't. Separate and apart from whether you have more operations.
Just to add, if I can add as well, Member Jackson, there has been an increase in meals as well, meaning the price per meal. So it's coming from $3.50 per
so
meal.
So is the unit cost of that?
That is a major contributing factor as
rather
well.
Rather than increase activity?
It's both, but I'm also suggesting that the increase per unit for meal is a significant or a contributing factor to the budget, annual budget for the meal going up as well.
No, and I could appreciate that if you have different change in location of purchases and prices that would obtain. But just lastly on that ACP, the point made by my colleague about the widespread report of policemen not being properly fed, has that been dealt with? Because I asked that, Chairman, because the morale of the force would be significantly compromised if basic routine day-to-day things like meals are not being reliably provided and the quality of it is not at a minimum acceptable standard.
Yes, we are satisfied that if you're speaking to recent reports in the media about issues with meals, those matters have been addressed.
So the policemen are satisfied now?
Yes, and if they're not, they're on their way to being satisfied.
Mr. Chairman, I asked that question deliberately because Chairman, my period in here is ACP is that the answers I get in here quite often different from the one I get out there. So when you tell me the matter has been taken care of by an administrative action, if it's not translated into changes for the policemen are crying hard, you know. There are many of them are my constituents. And all across the country I travel to, I stop and talk to them on the streets, you know. And they're crying. You're aware of the long hours that they're working and the families that are falling apart, right? That they are subjected to. That is what is compromising the quality of performance. In fact, some of them relate to me that they feel distressed because their professional training and what they know they're capable to do is being compromised in a significant way because of the long periods that they have to work. Some tell me they work up to 60 hours a week, right? I don't know how widespread, but some of those cases have been reported to me. But I'm seeing the result in the communities speaking about the kind of responses that they get. They are tired, they are burnt out. You have any psychologists in the force doing any survey assessment to see the stress that they're under as a result of the extended hours?
Well, thank you, Chairman. The long hours have been a feature of policing. You know, I've been serving for 35 years, and really 6 hours a week might appear long, but that is a sacrifice we make to keep Jamaica safe. And so we encourage the younger policemen to toil hard and long, because the work that we do is very important. Absolutely important.
But Mr. ACP, for the 30 years you have been in the force, Never in Jamaica's history that the JCF members have been required to work the extended hours that they have to work because of the state of emergency extended use. You have never had that before in your 30 years.
Well, I'm speaking about service to country.
No. You told me about the burnout as a result. No here, college gone.
All right, members.
No, Mr. Chairman. No. This is a very important point because ACP Clark was making the point that look, extended hours is a normal feature of police work, and I'm submitting that never in the history of Jamaica that the cadre of police officers have been required to work the level of extended hours now than they ever been before. So your 30 years as a cop does not measure up to what these crop of police officers are subjected to.
I'm not sure if I can help you, but the truth is, as I said, long hours have been a feature, right? And I admit that it has been outside of a state of emergency. I started my policing, for example, in Hunts Bay, in St. Andrews, and I would love to have worked 60 hours a week.
All right, members.
Chairman, I would like to add something in relation to the meals.
To who?
In relation to the meals, the concerns in relation to police meals. We have engaged the concessionaire about meal quality overall.
Who is the concessionaire? No, well, is it one concessionaire that does the meals for the entire JCF?
No, not at all, but specific to the concern that was raised in the media reports. This is the one that we have, and we have received one significant complaint.
All right, so because I didn't even know this was, we have seen the reports, but one, I didn't know whether it was a concessionaire or whether they were in the force, sometimes persons who cook, chefs, different things. So
this was a concessionaire.
So you have a concessionaire which was selected to provide these meals.
That is correct.
And that was a problem.
And there were concerns in relation to the quality. So we have since engaged the individual with a view to remedying the situation. But longer term, I want to point out.
How are these contracts engaged?
And that's what I was coming to that. Where police meals are concerned, we want to treat that more holistically. So we intend to launch a meal tender. And information I have here is that we want to launch that on January 28th.
Launch a what? Launch a what?
A meal tender.
A who?
Yes, a meal tender. Launch it 28th of January.
Yeah, but I'm just making the point that you have had the state of emergency is nearly 2 years old from Montego Bay side going right across. In all of this, we have seen the discussion, the volume of meals have more than doubled and gone up exponentially because of as well as the state of emergency, obviously. So one would have thought if you were using caterers that there would be some specific tendering process to engage this in the initial part. How were these persons engaged?
There would have been most likely some direct contracting.
Most likely?
Most likely, all right?
No, but Mr. Simpson, you mean you don't know?
Oh, I would not have all the information at this time. So I'm telling you that in response to a state of emergency, which we would not be able to know as the civilians in the ministry and the JCF, then we would have to put some arrangements in place urgently to address those issues. So we would normally proceed by using direct contracting procurement methodology. However, there is evidence to suggest that we might have to review some of those.
No, but what's the size of these contracts? Say these catering contracts?
Right. We don't, Chairman, we don't have that information right now at our disposal.
But you said you just reviewed, you had discussions with that caterer. What's the size of that contract?
The same response, Chairman. I don't have the specifics right here.
And, but these people have been servicing the JCF for a period of time.
That is correct.
And I can understand if you had to go in and do something overnight, but if I would have thought that you would have formalized your contractual arrangements with these caterers a long time ago.
Emergency.
Oh, these are outside of the state of emergency or for the state of emergency?
Well, in and out. But the outside would be the ongoing engagement.
Well, outside of the state of emergency, because there has been police support to areas that are affected by crime for a long time, even before the state of emergency. Police that would require support in terms of meals and accommodation. So that existed before the state of emergency. It has existed during the state of emergency, and it will after the state of emergency. I don't know.
ACP.
Yes.
You know, it's funny because, well, let me start at this point first. Fuel. What's the expected expenditure?
No.
Chair, I'm going down because I'm coming back to ACP, but I just want to, because something not sitting well with me. Outside of the state of emergency.
The fuel, as it is there, the budget approved was just over $1 billion, and we've been pretty consistent. The last report I have.
So, right here, up to September, 540 million, right? Which is halfway through the financial year.
Roughly 90 million a month, right?
Yeah. And I would expect that if you're doing additional operations, that also, just like your meals have gone up by twofolds, that your fuel bill would have moved up, and the price of fuel is moving too. You know, so, and that's why I raise it back, Chairman, because there's inconsistency in your figures here and what you're saying. Yeah, I get the point. I get the point with the meal and the price, you know, but you would not be spending twice the amount in an increase. It is your words that you are going to be spending about 85 million, and this is outside of the state of emergency.
Right.
Right?
I'm not sure what the inconsistency is.
No, because if you're doing additional operations,
right,
and yourself too, that your fuel would also spike also.
Yeah, but there are other variables that we'd have to take into consideration, improved efficiencies, savings. I'm just saying, Mr. Phillips, that I don't think you're being fair in saying...
No, I am being fair. I am being fair because if you look at what you have here for service and maintenance, service vehicle maintenance, $425 million for that has been budgeted, approved budget. You have spent up to September 313 million of that.
For service.
For servicing of the vehicles. You and I know that the vehicles that you have now, the age of the vehicles, don't make them the most efficient. So the only thing that you're telling me is either you're rolling out less vehicles,
so no,
or you're not gassing them up.
I'm sorry. I know that we had a previous discussion at another time on vehicles. And earlier in this discussion, I did indicate that a substantial amount of vehicles, close to 1,000, have been retired or in the process of being retired because they were inefficient. And we are moving towards deploying newer vehicles. I did say that, I'm sorry, the first ever, we have moved to 25% of the fleet being under 5 years, which means that we are improving on efficiency. As far as increased operations are concerned, the nature of state of public emergency operations is unique in the sense that the method of control has to do primarily with static points. So people are deployed in static points.
I just want to break it here. Because how the budget is done is in two parts. Outside of the state of emergency and the state of emergency.
Yes.
We are referring to outside of the state of emergency. Yeah? So your meal bill has gone up by 100%. Right? Your other expenses, accommodation, has gone up by nearly 300%. Yeah?
I'm sorry, I was addressing the issue of fuel that you raised.
Yeah? And I'm speaking about outside of the state of emergency. You yourself said that you have increased operations outside of state of emergency. And I'm just making the observation. I'm just making the observation that if your other costs have gone up and you're doing more operations, then I would expect that your fuel costs would go up because the men have to reach to us to a location.
So I'm saying to you that I don't know that we can make that distinction when it pertains to fuel. I don't know that we can say that this fuel was consumed in the state of emergency or outside the state of emergency because it's universal.
ACP?
Yes.
Right, no, but if I can be clear, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips.
And given to us.
Mr. Phillips,
yes,
we do not have expenditure for fuel inside of the state of emergency. So that's what Mr. Clark is saying. We can't distinguish the two. However, the line items that are there outside of the state of emergency, that is what we can speak to. But fuel, that's general, that's right across. We can't make that distinction.
So let me ask you a question then. So this 1 billion.
That's just for fuel, for the JCF.
That's for the JCF.
Everything, all operations, everything.
Yeah? Everything.
Everything. We can't make the distinction. But Mr. Phillips, be fair. We can't make the distinction for fuel outside. But tell me then, how can we distinguish for fuel outside of the state of emergency?
Hold on. Take this as a PEP exam. Eh? If you give me this and your heading says excluding state of public emergency activities, what other question do you expect me to ask?
Good point.
So who is being fair or unfair?
Take your point, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you very much. Yeah? No. And it even strengthens my point.
Yes, it compounds it.
Yeah? Because if this includes the state of emergency,
then it must be greater than 540.
And you're showing me an expenditure up to September, which is 50%, which is up to the 6-month point, or halfway the financial year. It's just not adding up. And you are telling me out of your mouth that you have had increased activities. So that's why I come back again. You say you have a quarter of the fleet that is now efficient, but you still have 75% of your fleet which is inefficient, and you are not spending additional on your fuel compared to accommodation, compared to so you're telling me that when they're staying down at a certain point in Montego Bay, are you doing an operation up in Salt Spring, they're going to walk it? The bulk of the team going to walk it? They must be transported to a point. And you're having additional operations. So, you know, I'm not saying that what you're saying is not true, but the numbers are just not adding up. It's not adding up. You're spending 100% more on food, but you're still spending below budget on fuel, and you're spending 300% more on accommodation. It's not adding up.
All right, members. All right, let me. We are at a point now. I was hoping that we'd be able to complete everything today. Obviously, we need a little more clarity with regards to some of these issues. So maybe a little further breakdown on as I said, the discussion on fuel. Mr. Simpson, I would say to you, I'm very disturbed by what you said in terms of these meals, simply because a number of things took place in the discussion. This is obviously an arrangement that has been in place for some time. It's done without a formal tender process, which at this point, belatedly, you seem to be attempting to engage. During the period of time, there have been two issues that would have been a perfect time for you to have formalized the arrangement. Number one, Mr. Calhoun, yes, had indicated that it's not just that there were more meals, but that the cost of meals went from what? From 250, from 300
to 500.
So now you had an increase from 300 to 500, which is at least, I'm not even certain it's a $200 per meal, but it's probably a 75%, 80% increase in the cost of the meals. And at that point, would have been a good starting point for you to have said, well, let us put this out to tender because the cost is going up phenomenally. But then, to be honest with you, at the second point where the members of the force start to complain about the quality of the food, and you're paying more, would definitely have been a moment again. So we'd specifically want a further report on that, historical, and the processed, and the details, so that we can look at that. Members, I'd really wanted to explore some more on the vehicles. We could ask just for some additional information. I'll just ask the clerks that we don't belabor just some of the numbers and so forth. And certainly Jamaica Eye is something which I'm...
a lot more questions on Jamaica
yeah, but
Eye.
we won't be able to engage that.
Not for today.
Today. So what I'm going to suggest, I'm going to, members, with your permission, we've had INDECOM here today. I would certainly welcome Commissioner if there's something he would like to say, because I don't necessarily feel they have to come back. We had not really asked for a report, but if he had some comments, we'd welcome those. And then what we would do simply is to ask that next week we will be taking the Ministry of Finance and Public Service with the second supplementary budget, and having seen it, I'm sure there is some welcome news for you in that. So, there might be some positive. However, we'll take that next week, Tuesday, and I would suggest that Wednesday, the 6th, is it? The following week, 28th. I think we're about the 6th. We would ask the ministry with the additional information so that we can at least finish off. I don't think this sitting should take very long because we have gotten 90%, but I don't think I don't think we can proceed much further today.
Chairman, just for further, a couple of things I want us to deal with then. Yes, I have a few more questions regarding the Jamaica Eye program. But procurement, and specifically, we spoke about some elements of it in the meal provision, etc. But the motor vehicles, recently, Chairman, you would have heard some disquiet in the motor vehicle sector regarding the tendering process for the acquisition of a new set of motor vehicles. I would like that to be taken up then, because as we speak about the tendering process, there are some issues that arose from that that is of grave concern in terms of how
that were in the public domain.
That are in the public domain. And we have a duty as a committee to ensure that the process of procurement, given what we have seen happen in CMU, Petrojam, Nestle, and a whole range of public entities, we have a duty to make sure that we stem those activities, because Mr. Simpson indicated the challenge he faced with having adequate supplies of motor vehicle being available to the force.
All right. So certainly we'll look at it. I also did see.
No, let us say when we are dealing with that, I would like the procurement officer in the ministry. But one other thing just to mention when we come again to Chairman, we have dealt with the SOE costs. You have asked the question, but we have only gotten the JCF costs.
Oh, I thought the Ministry of National Security would have included both.
No, it's only JCF costs, and there's no JDF.
Oh, you're JCF?
Only JCF.
Oh, I thought Mr. Simpson had referred me to his finance person as the overall.
For the security
as opposed to, yes, oh dear.
There, Chairman, there is a finance division in the central ministry, but the JCF finance branch is also a partner in all of this.
Oh, well, again, no, seems to be my day to be misguided in my understanding. Yes, when I had asked for the cost of the SOE, I certainly didn't mean JCF alone. I had wanted the entire cost. So thank you, Mr. Jackson, because that missed me totally.
No, is Mr. Simpson giving the undertaking that he will provide that, because in much the same way that the JCF is an operating entity, but incur these additional costs for these extraordinary activities, it is reasonable to construe that the JDF, as a normal operating activity, would have to deal with these extraordinary additional activities.
That's correct.
And what those additional costs would be.
Yes.
And I will tell you before, I don't want an answer to say that they are part of the regular JDF expenses, because it's not true. So I'm just forewarning you.
All right. So
they are proper response before.
We will bring those. We'll get that information. I understand the date is the 5th. Just for completeness, this line of discussion really took place because in looking at the report, we were talking about social intervention and the importance of social intervention. And the point was made that while at the level of organized crime and gangs, social intervention may not be a useful tool, certainly in the prevention of crime.
Other crimes.
It is an important element. Have I captured that right, DCP? I don't want to be misquoting anybody.
I wasn't specific in terms of gang. I was saying organized crime.
Yes.
Because
sort of like you don't think socializing will help the mafia but it will. But you do concede. You conceded that it's an important tool in fighting crime generally. Better, let me not fighting. Let me use the word preventing crime in the communities. And at that point, we had indicated that in our document there was the establishment of safe community, 227 million. You're indicating, Mr. Simpson, when we had that discussion, Mr. Whittick had indicated that that was a proposal, not supported by budget. For clarity, is it that some portion of the establishment of safe community was done, or was it scrapped entirely?
Chairman, I would prefer to apprise myself of the facts around that and maybe incorporate it in the report that you have requested.
Mr. Chairman.
But Ms. Whittick.
Mr. Chairman, just to help.
One second, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Whittick, but just to the point though, is there a budgetary provision for it in this year? Pardon?
No, sir.
All right. So, point being that you can follow up on it, Mr. Simpson, but maybe as part of the report you can indicate why it was not thought that these initiatives might have been useful.
No, you addressed what I was intervening, because Ms.
Yes.
Whittick
All right.
assisted.
With that, members, Commissioner, you've been here all day. I don't want to. I leave it at your discretion. It was sort of a late inclusion, and certainly if there's any comments you have or anything you'd like to say with regard to INDECOM, we can take it from there. So welcome to you and your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the hour, I'll try to be very brief, given the hour of the day. Given the hour of the day.
Oh. I thought you said within the hour.
No, certainly. Certainly not. When we get older, we have to, we can't have long breaks between meals. So we have to bear that in mind. I know we haven't had a written report to this committee, but INDECOM reports to Parliament 4 times a year. And in the last year and a half, we have reported extensively on police discipline and, of course, use of force, which is within our remit. And for the purpose of this brief presentation, I'd want to comment on those 2 aspects. Last year marked the lowest number of persons killed by police in Jamaica for as long as we can find reliable records.
Excellent.
Last year the number was 86. It is notable that when last we had a state of emergency, 2010, it was over 300 killed that year. So it is a lower number. But we must always bear in mind, however, that in a population the size of Jamaica, even a number of ATR is still a high number. And I don't fail to say that all are bad shootings or all are suspicious shootings. But once you have a high number, a number as high as that, in a small country like Jamaica, it requires that the state organize itself to be assured that force is being used properly, which requires an accountability framework that works. And indeed, once we give the police greater powers, the police already have awesome powers, but once we give the police greater powers, as we do under a state of emergency, we must ensure that there's an accountability framework which ensures that those powers are not abused. So in the past year and a half, we have reported on the police disciplinary proceedings, which we have found to be seriously wanting, particularly disciplinary proceedings for gazetted officers. We made the point that in the life of INDECOM, we have made numerous reports of gazetted officers who we have allegations and files that we have submitted of them breaching the rules of the police force. And I think we have now only had 3 responses in the last 5 years to what would be dozens of these cases going up. So that is a completely failed system as regards gazetted officers, because if you are not even getting a hearing, that is a failed system. For the rank and file, we reported 2 years ago that we are also getting no responses in those. But I'm happy to report that for rank and file there has been great improvement, and that the new police formation, IProbe, has been following up on some of these old outstanding reports. So we are now getting, so the improvement now is that we're getting responses, but we're still awaiting hearings being held. But at least we're seeing some movement on that area, which we are pleased for. But however, the problem goes beyond police management. We think that the regulations and rules which govern police use of force and police discipline are outdated and require serious and urgent reform. I'm happy to hear that there's the National Police Act is being finalized. I wish that the Ministry of National Security... Oh, I wrote as it was being said. I heard the word finalized and I wrote it down. I don't know if I misheard. But I would have hoped, even if it is being developed, the participation of INDECOM would be, we'd be welcome to participate, and we are wondering why we have not been included in any discussion around the Act. Because the framework, if you look at the Constabulary Force Act, it has a section which says, the minister shall make rules for the discipline of the police force. And the last rules were made when the Honorable Errol Anderson, of blessed memory, was the Minister of National Security. That must be 86, I would think. Those are the last rules that were made. And if you read those rules, they speak a lot about the uniform of the force and accoutrements, and hardly say anything about use of force. And you would think that the problem in the JCF was a problem of uniform and accoutrements, and not a problem of use of force. What we need is rules made by the minister. I would think that the provision needs to be changed to say made by the minister and approved by Parliament. But we need to have rules for the force which deal with the novel and unique problems of the JCF regarding how they use force, how they are accountable for use of force, and to ensure that you have fitness for duty, that the person who is necessarily given these great and onerous, great and awesome powers is someone who is fit for duty. We don't believe that it is so now, that there are many officers who are not fit for the duty, but because of the structure of police discipline and rules, it is not very easy for the commissioner to weed out those officers who are not fit. So what we're saying is that this is an urgent discussion that needs to be done about use of force and discipline. I would just close by saying, 4 years ago, the United Nations released a new handbook on use of force in policing. And it was first introduced here in Jamaica in a conference, where the UN came down here for a conference, a Caribbean conference, and we had Jamaican police officers, Jamaican soldiers, the Ministry of National Security was involved, and a policy was fashioned, a model policy was fashioned for how use of force in Caribbean police forces, security forces should be regulated. That policy has sat and has not been implemented. It would be a good starting point for the state to look at that policy and see what we can fashion from it to bring a modern, human rights-based umbrella policy for use of force in Jamaica. Because what we have done is that we have simply left it up to the various commissioners of police, abdicating the responsibility which should be in Parliament to ensure that there is a proper use of force policy governing our police force, which is involved in so many shooting incidents year upon year. In fact, we have our current, our last two quarter reports released this, which have been tabled in Parliament just this week, which speak about persons, innocent persons killed in crossfire or shot and injured in crossfire, which is a surprisingly large number. Now, we know that the police in Jamaica are confronted with deadly force. We know that. And we know that they will have to respond properly with force. But that does not mean that they must not be properly regulated by policies which ensure that force response is proportionate and necessary and legal. So I urge then that, that we move towards a national use of force legislation, whether it be delegated legislation or legislation that can govern the military, the police, security guards, etc., etc. I leave with one example. The revelation in the Tivoli inquiry that the Jamaica Defense Force used mortars, which are area weapons, during the 2010 operation, shows the need, and the fact that the political directorate, from the evidence at the Commission of Inquiry, was not aware of the impact of mortars and the nature of using mortars in a built-up community, shows the need for regulating what weapons and use of force can be used against our citizens. It ought not to be left to the heads of the forces. This is a national issue which belongs in our Parliament. Those are my points.
All right. Well, in wrapping up, members, I would say to you, Commissioner, and I'm sure both DCP and ACP, you know, I've heard many summaries of the report, but the start was very good. You know, so, and I think the JCF should be commended, as yourself and others. I think at the end of the day, some of these things that we're moving, some of these parameters in the right direction are certainly positives. You have indicated, well, one thing in particular, that there needs to be some amendment, some there's a need to take a further look at the regulations or the legislation looking at the operations. I did notice earlier when we spoke that in talking about the National Police Act, they spoke about elements of that. And I'm sure, and I think Mr. Simpson, to know what sort of consultative process, which if the partners have been consulted, it means that you're far earlier in the process than we had even anticipated. But that there is a need for broad consultation on it. I would, in closing, I would certainly, I don't know if ACP and DCP wanted to say anything or if we, if it is good. But I would just ask one question, Mr. Simpson. I think it would fall under the ministry. There has been a call because a number of officers, when there are issues or questions, there are legal costs that come up, not just within INDECOM, but broader. And there have been discussions about a fund or some support for officers and members of the constabulary at all levels to assist with legal representation where necessary. Has this been put in place? Is there any headway in it? Is it now a matter resolved?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for that question. Yes, I can confirm that there is a legal defense fund. I think the figure that forms it is about $10 million. Notwithstanding the sheer number of legal matters and the attendant costs, you'd imagine is way above that. So as we speak, the ministry is in the process of putting in the appropriate policy parameters to effectively administer the legal defense fund. But the position of the ministry, I can say, is that we support law enforcement in terms of representation where issues arise in the lawful execution of their duties.
Yeah, because I would think that there would be two levels to it. One would be that a thought would be either the ministry or the JCF would have a cadre of lawyers, specifically that deal with court, that could form a first layer, because a lot of the issues are not, maybe not that serious, but when you do go to a lawyer, there's a cost incurred. And then a second level, that would be the fund to help with it. But I'm just saying, I don't know.
Say that all of that is part of the policy/administrative considerations. I know that the JCF at this time, they are recruiting. We got approval from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service for the retention of about 20 attorneys. And they are now in the process of recruiting same. Notwithstanding, there is going to be a need for external counsel.
Yes.
And we're fine-tuning
and so the fund is
arrangements.
important in of itself.
Yes, and we recognize that, and we're fine-tuning the arrangements around that.
Mm-hmm. All right, DCP, ACP, anything to add with it, or you're comfortable with that?
Just to say that in terms of the use of force policy, I mean,
yeah.
we have no challenge as a law enforcement body, and we have been having discussion in terms of how can the policy be so adjusted to meet the reality of
and you would also be involved in the discussions with the ministry at this police act.
We actually met with INDECOM. It was last week. We had a joint meeting.
No, speaking to the mic.
We had a joint meeting. INDECOM and the commissioner and a team met, and there are some
so
consensus and
there's
agreement.
An ongoing process
yes.
to try and the information on this, because some of this would be involved it would be involved in the National Police Act. Am I correct? So that's correct?
That's correct, Chairman.
So would that has that consultation started with JCF, INDECOM, etc., etc.?
The consultation has definitely started with JCF. I'm not absolutely sure as it concerns with INDECOM, but it's something to definitely consider going forward.
All right.
In that regard, Chairman, in that consultation, and I fully appreciate the concerns or the reaching out by the INDECOM, the other stakeholder grouping within the JCF, such as the Police Federation, have they been included in these consultations?
As far as I'm aware, they have been included because there's a section treating with welfare, so they have definitely been included in consultation.
And the other arms of in the JCF, such as the officer corps and the district constables, and particularly district constable, constables with whom I have met, and they have raised that as a concern because they're aware of the process, but there's no consultation that has taken place with them.
As far as I'm aware, I'm not sure if consultation has happened directly with the...
Well, they up to about a month and a half ago. I represented the minister at their conference a month and a half ago, and that was one of the concerns.
You represented who?
They said nobody from government, the political directorate, except myself was there. So I just represented everybody.
The minister. On that note,
Mr. Chairman and member, the district constables are dealt with under the Constables District Act. I'm not sure what would be their particular interest in the JCF.
That is true. There are the act for them, but let us be frank. They work together, right? The district constables work. They are subordinates to in most part, to the members of the constabulary force. And if you are developing a new approach, it wouldn't take anything to hear their views. Well, from where I am, I believe in an inclusive approach as is possible. The INDECOM, for example, they have a separate act, but they work in conjunction with the JCF. So nothing is wrong by having some input from them. It shows cooperation.
Accepted, yeah. Yes. Okay, so members, on your behalf, let me thank the representatives from the Ministry of National Security, including the JCF and from INDECOM. It's been a very informative day, certainly for me. So thank you for your forthrightness and for the discussion. We will follow up on those issues, specifically elaborating on Jamaica and the transportation, etc. INDECOM will not be necessary, Commissioner. So with that, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one thing before you go. So we can expect a written correspondence from here laying out exactly what you require from us.
Yes, absolutely. All right, on that note, members, we adjourn till next week, Tuesday at 10 o'clock for the second. Yes, yes. Okay, committee now adjourned. Thank you.
Paradise Plum, and keep it locked to PBCJ. This is your girl, Naomi Cowan.